Yeah, I think we're at 354, 55, somewhere in there right now. So
yeah,
it's a lot. It's for a while. When we thought COVID was going to be that 2-3 week thing, we started doing like 5 a week because we were talking to people every week about what was going on, and then after about a month of that, we realized, oh, this isn't going to be a 3 week thing, and we went back to the weekly schedule. So that was a little bit, but there was a big push back in early 2020 then that we ended up having a whole lot more episodes, so that was part of it.
Yeah. At this point, you're doing weekly?
We're doing weekly, yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Throwing in an extra one every now and then, but mostly just weekly. Yeah.
Neat. Cool. I mean, I think we'll get started in just a minute. I just want to share, like, in this show, like, so first of all, like, I'm the founder of Castos. We're a podcast hosting platform like Libsyn or Blueberry that you might use.
Okay.
And the goal of this show really is to, well, one, like, it's awesome for me to talk to podcasters. So I've been doing this a while. Like, we have 280 episodes of my podcast, so not quite as many, but so I've been doing it a long time, and like, it's really healthy for me to stay like chatting with podcasters about what they're doing, and to keep learning, because like you do something for a while and you think you know, and you don't. so
very true.
So that's like,
very,
first of all, it's
true.
like, just love talking to folks and see like what they're doing and what's working and what's not. And then like, we record this and it's helpful for everyone else, but really it's just like an educational experience.
It's one of the things that Tim, my co-host, and me talk about, right? Is like, we just being able to do this and to talk to the people that we get to talk to. It's like, Nobel laureates wouldn't just pick up the phone and say, hey, sure, I'll spend an hour with you just talking, unless we had a podcast, which they do. And that's just, it's an amazing opportunity to just talk and learn. And I just love that part. So.
Yeah, neat. Let's dive into that. Like, how do you approach guests, right? Because it's you and a co-host plus a guest. Like that's a lot of logistics. A lot of folks have one or the other. Do you find, and you've done so many episodes, like, do you find all of the logistics difficult, or do y'all have a system down for it now?
And the logistics are always never easy. For the most part, there's always scheduling difficulties. We try to do our recording on Friday mornings. We try to get into a routine and have that going. And so we schedule those in advance, but there are always the outliers. There's always the changing in schedules. There's always the confusion. So there's always something that goes on that you just have to remain flexible, and you have to be able to accommodate different, again, interviewing people around the globe. We're talking to somebody next week from Brisbane, Australia. So we're all right. So how are we going to do the time schedules? All right. So
he's getting up early.
He's a day ahead. so all of those factors that come into play. I don't think that we have a great, wonderful process for it. I think it's probably the process that most people do. It's kind of a back and forth, and we have a scheduling email system that we send people to, but sometimes we got to work outside of that too. Yeah.
How about, like, you mentioned like Nobel laureates and like high profile people. I mean, I knew some of the people on your site, and I'm not like in that space, but like, how does the pitch go? Like, hey, do you want to come on our podcast and talk about this thing? Like, do you have a couple of topics that you pitch to them, or like what? Because I think that's something that folks struggle with. Is like, hey, I want to have this person on. What does that look like?
Yeah, we have a different approach depending on people. So we're approached a lot ourselves, but obviously there's people that we want to go after and to try to get on the show that we think are going to be really good guests. Most of the time, again, we're talking with behavioral scientists, researchers, Nobel laureates, as you said. We've gotten a couple of those high profile people that have, best-selling books and various different things in the topic areas that we want. So when we do this, we try to bring some of the behavioral science that we talk about on the show into that. So, when we craft an email, different pieces. Obviously, like everybody, if we have a warm introduction, that's much better than a cold kind of calling. So if there's anybody that knows, we often ask our guests, hey, who do you think would be a good guest? And oftentimes they'll lead us down a really nice path. And that's always a much easier sell to get people back on, particularly if they do the introduction and talk about how much fun they had with us and various different pieces. But two, one of the things is, as you mentioned, we don't necessarily pitch a topic unless we know they have a book or something coming out. Most of the time, the really top tier ones, aren't necessarily that, but we will talk about their research. So we'll talk about how we have been fans of, their research and maybe bring in some very specific elements around that to say, hey, this paper from, 2006 really inspired us to think about things in a different way. We'd love to talk to you about that or anything else. And then the other part that we do is we do social proof, and we talk about we mention, all right, we've won awards. We mentioned that, it's a casual, fun thing, but we also get into, and we've had these other guests on the show. And as you said, like, you hopefully recognize some people and you're not in the space. People who are in the space will definitely recognize those names. And so, that will be a good piece on this. So that's the process that we use. And again, you alter that based upon personalities and if we know something about them. So that's what we do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's changed a lot in the kind of years since you've been doing it, right? Do you find it easier to get people on now that you have like a good following and kind of name in the space?
Yeah. I think again,
like I'm just an anecdote. Like I've been podcasting for 7 years, but this is a brand new show. This is the 9th episode we've recorded. And it's really hard to get someone on a podcast that hasn't even launched yet. Like we just launched it last week as we're recording this. It's super hard, even though we have like a decent name in the space and everything. Let's say it gets easier for everybody.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot easier. People are searching you out. You're getting requests. Your name is known. So even if you do, hopefully there's some brand recognition within that. The thing that has amazed me, though, and that we learned relatively early on, and I don't think this is unique to the space that we're in, I think this is just a general human thing, is that, just ask. Ask politely, ask nicely, but it is amazing how people respond to that. We got people that there was no reason they would have ever come on. They should have ever come on our podcast when we had 20 episodes and, a following of a couple hundred. And they're like, sure, that sounds great. We'll come on. And it's just, you go, what? Wait, I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking you were going to say no. All right. Now we actually have to do some work. But yeah, those are fun. So.
Yeah. You mentioned like the subject matter that y'all that you podcast on. It's a lot about like kind of behavioral psychology.
Yep.
Do you find the subject matter difficult to speak on in a podcast like audio only format where people can't see you? They might not like know you. I mean, after 350 episodes, you've probably gotten good at it. But like,
no,
what's that dynamic like?
No, so it's a long format style. And so one of the things that I think plays out really well is that both Tim, my co-host, and myself really just, we are constantly just wanting to learn. And so like you talked earlier, like, the ability to talk to these people, to learn from them. And so we're just having conversations, and those conversations, sometimes are directed by, hey, this is a specific topic or book that we want to talk about. But even then, it's just this idea of, tell me more about that. Help me understand why you did this, or what this implies, or what this means. And I think that energy of having that curiosity, I think, is a really big piece of this. And I think that translates. And so from a scientific perspective, we're talking about, human biases and heuristics and, some of the neurobiology sometimes. And would it be great to have some diagrams and different pieces when you get some of the technical aspects? That's fantastic. But I don't think it's necessary. And I think one of the other things that we did, and we started this actually right away, kind of by happenstance, is we do our long format interview, usually 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But then we, in post-production, Tim and I do what we call a grooving session, where we then take what we heard. And so we publish the long format in its entirety. And then we go and we groove on it. Basically, it's behavioral groove. So we're grooving on what we learned. And so if it gets really technical in the conversation, in the grooving session, we'll try to break that down into more common language and implications. And if we often talk to people who are maybe less on the research side and on application side, or as we call accidental behavioral scientists sometimes. And so then we'll bring in the science part on the back end. And so it's kind of a nice way to measure that out, so that if it is highly technical in some of the nature of what people are talking about, we can break that down at the back end, or vice versa.
Yeah. Do you release those as like two separate episodes, or the same?
It's
episodes,
the same
different
same episode. So there was, so I will take a caveat on that 354 episodes, because there was a period.
Cheated a little.
There was a period in there where we thought, maybe we should just break these up, because that would be, and so we did that for probably, I think, 10 episodes, 10, 15 episodes. So subtract that off of the top of there, because those are really part one and part two of the same episode in my mind. But yeah, we realized that didn't it actually decreased people listening to the second part of it, and it wasn't necessarily tied in, so we just rolled it back in. Yeah,
interesting. I think from a workflow perspective, what you do with the grooves is sometimes really challenging for customers. We have like a professional services arm to our business, and we have customers that come in and say they want to do this thing, right? They're going to go interview someone for 45 minutes, then take and do a 10-minute monologue on it.
Yeah.
And we always warn them, like, okay, if you're going to do that, do not leave that chair until you've recorded it right after the interview is over, because what's going to happen is you got another thing at 2:30, and you're going to leave, and you're going to come back 6 days later when you have to send the episode to us, and you're not going to remember what you just talked about. Yeah. Like, have you all, you're smiling, like, have you all run into that, or have you just have like a process to where your co-host keeps you honest, and y'all
we do a process. So we actually don't record right after. We don't do the post-production immediately afterwards. And so we will get the recording. We will get a transcript of that. We take notes. We have our producer, research associate, who typically listens in and is taking notes as well. And so then what we do is we will actually sit down after the fact, go through the transcript, kind of highlight areas that we want to pull out, set up an outline. So we're not scripting the grooving session, but we're outlining it, and then we're bringing in. So again, as I talked about, part of it is if we don't get deep into some of the science, or even if we get into the science, we might bring in tangential science. So we will, and again, I'm sounding very technical on here, and it's not, but we will often bring in like, this references, this paper from 2018, and here's, that was by these authors, or we'll bring in some of those pieces. So we'll actually do that research prior to doing the grooving session, so that we have that and we can talk intelligently about that. So bringing that piece in. So I'm smiling because the amount of, it would be so easy. It'd be so nice to be able to just do an interview and stop, and like, all you got to do is your intro. And wow, that would be, oh my gosh, that would be so simple. But we are spending hours, in the research part of following up on doing the grooving session, and then the recording of that. And again, those are 10 to 20 minutes typically. So they're not super long, but that's 10 to 20 minutes. That can be, a few hours every time going into that. So
yeah, I think like that's just good, I'll say, advice / warning to folks who say like, hey, I want to do this kind of special extra segment after an interview. It's like we say it's just as much work as doing a full interview. So like it's great. It's a huge value to the listeners, I think, but it's just a ton of work. So kudos to y'all for pulling it off.
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
to that point. I would echo that. I think there's a huge value in that, but I also that the amount of effort going into that part might not be on par, but pretty close to the interview itself. So you're doubling your workload.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to ask about how the podcast kind of serves you and Tim professionally. Like what's the dynamic there with like your kind of professional life? Like how does the podcast interact or kind of serve that?
Yeah, so Tim and I started it. Actually, it was just we didn't even plan to start it. We were doing a meetup locally here in Minnesota, which was Tim had left his job and started a consultancy. I had been having a consultancy. We both were working in behavioral science. So ours is a behavioral design and communication agency. And so we bring in behavioral science all the time and use that as kind of the lens that we approach work from. And we just wanted to build a community within Minneapolis. And so we did one of those meetups. Second meetup, we had a guest that was going to come speak, and we're going, we're going to get 25 people to this. And he's a pretty well-known speaker. And so in the field, and I had just done a radio interview. Tim is a musician, so he has all this musical recording equipment. And so we came up with this great idea of saying, hey, let's just record. We'll have our guests come in because there's a monthly meetup, have them come in an hour early. We'll record them before talking about what they're going to talk about, and then we'll just publish that, and it'll be once a month. It'll be great, easy to do.
Easy.
Yeah, easy.
Here you are.
And here we are. And the meetup we don't even do anymore. And so, but the concept was building that community. And so the community for us is still really kind of key on this. And so again, the fact that I have a podcast, Tim has left his consultancy and is now the head behavioral scientist at a large bank. But still, by having that community, we've expanded our reach into who we can tap into, the insights, as you said, just kind of learning from this. I'm constantly amazed at the insights that we're getting from the interviews that, it directly applies to the work that we're doing with our clients. And so I can take what we heard on Friday, and Monday we're applying some of those insights into some of the work that we do. And the context and the other pieces, we've gotten connections, and some of that has led to work. We'd like more of that. It isn't a sure thing, but it definitely has led to work. But it's led to increased kind of exposure, increased kind of feelings of expertise that we have and that we can bring to the table. Yeah,
interesting. What advice would you give folks? Because I think a lot of people are in a similar boat to you, right? They have like an agency or consultancy, they're professionals. They have a podcast or wanted to get a podcast, but I think a lot of folks are still kind of like scared about like, hey, how will I be perceived in my space if I start a podcast and I'm talking outside of work about professional things? Like, what advice would you give someone in a similar position to where you were? Like, hey, I want to start this thing. I want it to have an impact on my business, but I don't want to sell out. I don't want to seem like I'm selling something. Yeah. And like just offer value, and hopefully like things come back to us.
Yeah, and I think to the latter part is really important, because I think for most listeners, if they feel like you're trying to sell them, it kind of isn't going to be as impactful. It's your podcast is going to not be as successful. So with that, for the people who are doing it, is one, just make sure that you have some passion around it. If this is a project management, if it's around law, if it's around whatever it is, just make sure you have passion around it, and you're not trying to do it because, if I do this, I will get more sales, or I'll be perceived as an expert. You need to really have that curiosity and that idea, particularly if it's going to be an interview style one where you're talking with people, and then just give it time. Again, I think the biggest, and you probably have better, stats on this, but the amount of people who start and then don't continue. Part of it is you realize, this isn't as easy as just recording an hour-long thing and then it's done. No, it's a lot more a lot more goes into it than that. So, but that it's that long term, and you start to build up and keep those, open up the channels to your listeners and have those conversations. Because some of those conversations, we have had people, over the years where we're continuing different conversations, and eventually sometimes that leads into, hey, I have this, I was talking to a friend and they have this issue, and all of a sudden you can get some business from it if that is indeed what you're trying to do. But that would be my recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Cool place to wrap it up for me. Kurt Nelson of Behavioral Grooves, where can folks check out kind of more about you and the podcast? Behavioralgrooves.com?
Behavioralgrooves.com. We are on Twitter at Behavioral Groove without the E or the S. They had to truncate that. So we're out there as well. And any of the traditional podcasts, places where you listen, we're up there. So
awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.